Hello, everyone. Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. Glad to see y'all coming in. We're going to be talking about food powders, the making, using, and some more. I have lots of videos about making and using different types of food powders, and I'll get into that. But what I would like you guys to do is go ahead in the comments, put what some of your favorite food powders are. Now, this doesn't have to be just ones you make. This can be ones that you prefer to buy, even if it's like milk, like a whole milk powder. But I also linked to several videos in the description box. One of them was the one I did about a year ago, I think it was, on making and using food powders and my favorite ones to make and how I use them. I just kind of did a rough run through of those. And then I linked to a few specific ones, but there's a lot more out there. Like I have one I think one of the ones I linked to was the pumpkin powder, the egg powder, how I dehydrate eggs and then powder them up and use them, the citrus peel powder, and a few more videos. And then I think I did one on how to use dairy powders and the different types. So though I've made a few different dairy powders, because of the cost of getting a good organic dairy of any kind and then dehydrating it up, it's not really worth it for me to do it that way. I've done it just to try it to know I can do it. But it's more worth it to me to purchase the organic dairy powders when I can get them organic, I should say that. Not all of them are all organic, but I do have some good quality dairy powders. Like I have butter powder, I have heavy cream powder. That one I do recommend purchasing because to take those kind of things and turn them into a powder, you got to use a completely different method that I think the standard person doesn't have access to. They don't even use freeze drying for that. They use a process called spray drying. And I've tried making a heavy cream powder, and while it dehydrated up good, when I tried to powder it, it turned to butter. And it was like fat, it wasn't dry. It wasn't a dry powder. I've done half and half. That turned out okay. I recently tried it and I'm like, it's kind of gritty. I just mixed a little water and I didn't heat it. I didn't put it in the blender, but it would probably be good to use if you're going to dehydrate it yourself, to use in a gravy, something you're going to cook. I've made cheese powder. Did I bring that in? I didn't bring the cheese powder. I got all these orange things in here. None of them are, I have one that's green, but I'll show that in a bit, but it's not actually a powder. Done cream cheese. That turned out all right. And the yogurt turned out okay. So some of this stuff turns out fine, rehydrating it and stuff. Some of it is so. The whole milk powder turned out great. But again, for me, it's just not worth it to do that. But I wanted to know I can and show people that they can. So especially if you have your own dairy animals, yes, that is one way you can put up your excess milk, is to dehydrate it, and it would take up less room in storage. But of course, like any dehydrated or dried dairy powder, it's going to take on that dried dairy taste. Some of it tastes way better than others. It depends on like making yourself. When I made it myself out of some organic milk, I think it was Organic Valley milk I had, it turned out just as good as the organic whole milk, the quality organic whole milk powder I have bought. I say don't buy low fat or fat free milk powders. They're not only gross, it's just silly. It doesn't make sense. Get the whole milk powder. It tastes better, it's better for you. But that's if you're going to purchase it. So anyway, if you'd like to know how to use those, I recommend you check out that video I'll be linking to down below, because I do use them. I try to save a lot of it for when I absolutely have to, depend on it. But at the same time, I try to work through them. And I like using them quite a bit for making gravies, like a white sauce for such as that salmon noodle casserole I recently made. So using your dairy powders for making those kind of sauces, like a cream of mushroom soup / sauce or whatever, that instead of buying that canned stuff, you just make your own. It's super easy. the things that I make and then use would be the apple powder. This works best if you have a more tart apple that's not super, super sweet. The more sugary your fruit is, the harder, especially if you're just dehydrated. If you're freeze drying, it will always powder up beautifully. But if you're dehydrating, a lot of your fruits aren't going to powder up very well. But I wouldn't want everything powdered anyway. But I do powder up some of the apples I dehydrate from our tree. Zucchini, pumpkin, as I showed you, egg, cheese. And I have a video on that. I think that's one of the ones I linked to down below. Bone broth. Well, I don't really powder the bone broth, but you can. I just flake it up. I don't bother powdering it. It doesn't matter either way because of what it is. The citrus peel, rhubarb. So I dehydrate raw rhubarb and powder it up. That is of everything I do, the things I do the most of powdering up, drying and powdering up are the eggs, the pumpkin powder, and the rhubarb powder, because that's the only way I'm going to use those kind of preserved things is in a powder form. Then there's horseradish. Well, that's probably the only way I put up horseradish now is to dehydrate it and powder it. I don't powder my own onion and garlic. I dry some onion and some garlic, but that's something that I'm more apt to purchase, organic granulated onion and organic granulated garlic. I don't like getting the powders. I do dehydrate and powder up like onion skins and just mix it in with the granulated onion I already have, just to make the most out of that. I've made beet powder. Beet powder makes a nice, beautiful burgundy color, and you can use that for even coloring foods. Red cabbage makes a nice purpley color that can also, again, be used as a lovely food coloring. It's actually quite beautiful. And then my Chinese 5 colors, colored peppers. That's what I do now. I was used to cut them up and freeze them and like to use them in pieces because of all the pretty colors. You get a little purple, a little yellow, a little orange, a little red in there and add that to foods. But now I just powder it up. It kind of makes more of an orange hot pepper, but I love it. I love, love, love it. It is so tasty. I like it better than cayenne pepper. And I would say it's hotter than cayenne pepper as well. So you have to be a little more careful with it, but I love the flavor of it. Oh, obviously, you can take your beet powders and add them to smoothies and stuff. But for me to do that, it'd be more of like something I'd like to use as a natural food coloring, you know. Let's say you're making some kind of chocolates and you want to add a pretty color. You could use, well, I don't know if the cabbage powder might add a weird taste, but the beet powder surprisingly can go well with sweet stuff. Beets are kind of sweet anyway. And then another video I think I put down below was when I was taking different things and making baby food powders out of them. So to me, that is like if you've got grandbabies, you got your own babies, that is in my personal opinion, that is like the best way to put up your own baby food. So you're taking good natural foods, either straight from your garden or something that you've purchased organically, and you cook it up. After you cook it, just process it in the blender, and then you can spread it out on your silicone sheets and dehydrate it up, and then put it back in the blender again. Obviously, the blender's clean and dry by this point, and then powder it up, and it will take up so little room in your cabinet, and you only need a little bit. Add some water, let it sit for a little bit, and you've got instant baby food. And it doesn't take up a lot of space. It's cheap and it's healthy, and you know exactly what's in it. If I had that to do all over again, that's how I would do it. What I used to do, what I did with my firstborn was I did buy a bunch of baby food, well, not knowing any better about baby food, assuming it was all healthy stuff, but I bought it mostly so I could have those cute little jars. And then after I had enough jars, after we worked through that, then I would cook up fruits, vegetables, or whatever, and then make just a baby food and put it in the jars and then freeze them. That worked really good. That way I could just cook up a whole bunch. But you got to depend on the freezer, and it's going to take up more room than the dehydrated. But I didn't have a dehydrator back then. That was a long time ago. You can do that with not just your fruits and vegetables, like some common one like carrots and green beans. I think those are the ones I was showing. the carrots and the green beans and squash, like your pumpkin, your butternut, your spaghetti squash, but it obviously anything that you can, process up and dehydrate and then easily powder. Like I said earlier, if you're just dehydrating, your fruit powders they're not going to powder up very well. They can clump and get hard if you're not careful in your jars. But you can also make baby cereals. I mean, what's in baby cereals? Rice, oats that they've just processed up really small and then throw a bunch of garbage in there. You can do that without the garbage. Just take some rolled oats, throw them in the blender and powder them up, or whatever other thing you'd prefer to use for powder. And like coffee grinders work well. It's just, I like using a blender if I'm doing a bunch because you can do a lot more at a time. If you're doing a little bit, like you're just wanting to sample, coffee grinders are great because they work better with small amounts where your blender isn't going to work as well with a small amount. You got to have more in there for it to work well. Now, other things that I dehydrate up that some people would powder that I don't prefer to powder, but you can, would be things like your herbs. I like to flake my herbs up. I mean, some people prefer to powder them. Now, if I'm going to use them like a medicinal herb and I want to make them into a capsule or mix them in with water, then I would powder it up if I want to take it that way, because maybe I don't like the taste of the herb and I don't want to have it in a tea or something like that. Then I would powder it up, either encapsulate it, which I don't really like doing that because it's a waste of capsules and it's a pain. And then just throw it in a little bit of water, if I'm needing that herb for something, and just drink it down really fast. Do the same thing with the eggshell powder and the diatomaceous earth. That's typically how I work that. But right here, I do have my mixed greens. And so you can see that they are flaked. They're not powdered. Because of how I use that, I don't like having it in a powder form because I'm usually adding it to sauces, to gravies, to casseroles, to soups. And I prefer to have the little pieces in there rather than to have a powder that turns everything in there green. So that's just my personal preference. Some people do like to powder those things up. I'll even add it to meatloaf when I'm making a meatloaf, to hamburger patties, just to get more nutrition into whatever it is I'm making. So if you're new to my channel, this is, I won't remember everything that's in here. I'm just going to give you a few examples. One of the number one things that's in here is nettle leaf and dandelion leaf. But I have other things like grape leaves, strawberry leaves, kale. If I'm growing rutabaga or beets or anything like that, in the year that I'm making this, I'll dehydrate those up and add them to them. Any of your good, healthy greens can go in there. And then the one I definitely never powder are my tomatoes. So the tomatoes, what I do is I process them in a blender first. So they're already, a puree. I leave the skins on, I leave the seeds. I don't go through all the work of taking off all that good stuff because I'm just going to process it down anyway. It doesn't matter. And I just blend it all up and then pour it onto my dehydrator trays and then dry it up. And when it's fully dry, it's actually a really yummy snack like that. But once it's fully dry, then I just flake it. Now here, if you're new to my channel and you don't know this, here's the reason why I do not ever powder the tomato flakes. And that is because even though they take up less room than the flakes, you're going to end up with, unless you keep your jar consistently vacuum sealed. So let's say you're working through a jar of your own homemade tomato powder, you're going to want to vacuum seal it between every use, because if you don't, it will turn into a brick. But if you flake it up, that doesn't happen. Now, I still vacuum seal all my jars that are going back into long-term storage, but the jar, and it'll be a quart jar, the jar I'm working through, once I've opened it and I start working through it, I don't vacuum seal. I've never needed to. It never turns to a brick in the jar. And several people have shared with me before too that they did that with tomatoes. They powdered it and put it in a jar, and then they opened it and were working through it, and then didn't work through it fast enough. It turned into a brick. Anyway, so it doesn't need to be powdered to make a sauce out of it anyway, because it was already pureed before you made it. before you dehydrated it. So all you got to do is add water and then whatever else you're going to do, like if you're making a soup, mostly just sauces. I'm just making sauces. Let me go back and talk about a few of the things that I've already mentioned that I like to dehydrate and powder up and how I use them, even though in the individual videos that you'll see, especially probably that I probably go through plenty enough in that video I linked at the top. But like rhubarb powder, the number one way I use that, and this is why it's now the number one way I put up my rhubarb, is that it makes a excellent lemon juice replacement in pies and other kind of desserts where you would add, a little bit of lemon juice to help with, bring out the flavor of whatever fruit it is. Typically it's something you're going to add to like an apple pie or an apple crisp or an apple Betty. I can just throw that rhubarb powder in there and it's cheap. It's actually free because it came from my garden. And it makes an excellent flavor. It works out so good. I love it in my apple pies. But of course, any of these powders, especially like your fruit ones and your beet powder and whatever can be added to a smoothie if you like that kind of thing. But anyway, apple powder, I like to add to homemade pancakes. Like when I'm making pancakes, I mix it up every time. So we watch Jace the last Saturday of every month. So what I do is I plan to make pancakes that day and I'll do them different every time. And he loves grandma's pancakes. So I might do a pumpkin pancakes with my pumpkin powder or an apple pancakes or something like that. And try to just kind of switch it up, have it be a little bit different. And so the apple and the pumpkin I love using in the pancakes. I've got a lot of uses for the pumpkin. I actually finally made my first pumpkin pie using just the pumpkin powder this lot, in the fall. It was either for Feast of Tabernacles one night or it was for Thanksgiving. I don't recall, but I used the pumpkin powder. It turned out great. Loved it. It was so good. And so from now on, and this is all homegrown pumpkin, this is the only way I'll put up my pumpkin now. Takes up far less room than canning it or freezing it. It's great. The cheese powder, mostly that's something I'll just throw in with the powdered eggs to make like a scrambler, or an omelet. And you just throw them both in there. You got your egg powder, you add some water, you add some, a spoonful of the powdered cheddar cheese powder, and then whatever else you want to add to it. You can just rehydrate it in milk if you want to make it more rich. I've tried it on popcorn. It doesn't stick very well. It's good, but it doesn't stick very well. But it's still good. And yeah, and of course I use the cheese powder in making like a homemade mac and cheese to make the sauce. It's great that way. It's powdered up. You just mix it in with your milk and all that, and just cook it until everything's kind of dissolved and melted in, and it works out really great. I have a whole bunch of videos in the description box, and they're not even all of my powder videos. They're just where I show how I dehydrate. I don't have a freeze dryer, though I've powdered up freeze-dried foods that I bought from Mother Earth products. It's a lot more expensive to either buy a freeze dryer and do that or to buy the freeze dried, but I do like keeping some on hand for special things. And I powdered up like freeze dried raspberries for adding to my homemade chocolates if I want a raspberry cream chocolate. But yeah, it's just a matter of dehydrating and throwing in your blender. And if it's freeze dried, same thing. Just throw it in your blender and it will powder up great. But just know that like fruits do not dehydrate up always in a form that can be powdered because of the high sugar content. So in that case, if you do happen to have a freeze dryer, that would be, or you prefer to be like me and not invest in a freeze dryer and just stock up on a few of your favorite freeze dried fruits that you want to use for flavors. So or things that like we can't grow pineapple, we can't grow banana. We can grow raspberries, but I still stock up on those. We can grow cherries, but we don't get a lot. So those are my 4 favorite fruits. Oh, and mangoes. I wouldn't say they're my favorite, but I do like having the freeze-dried mangoes. And I get all those from Mother Earth products, which you'll always find linked in my description box. The thing I really like about Mother Earth products, small family-owned business, U.S. based, and they're really good people, but I like the fact that they sell things in different sizes. So you don't have to buy this big number 10 can of something and find out you really hate it. And especially if you're considering getting a freeze dryer, I still recommend doing that and trying all the different things there are in smaller amounts to find out, is it going to be worth it to me to purchase a freeze dryer? To me, it's not. There's not enough freeze dried foods that I like, and plus a plethora of other reasons why I will never own a freeze dryer, even though I was offered a free one and I turned it down for, a video review exchange. Not going to do it. But, and I have videos on that if you'd like to know why. But for those people that are really sold on freeze dried foods and want to go that route, I still highly recommend do your research about freeze dryers, learn all you can about them before you make the investment, and find out if you're even going to like any of those foods. So the other thing, freeze dried fruits can be used for powdered up is making like cream pies. I've done that before too. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about those kind of powders that you can purchase. So I talked a little bit about the freeze dried things and then making your own powders, but some that I purchased, and I also mentioned the dairy powders. So I don't have to go into all that again, but that's when it comes to that, since we don't have dairy animals, it's worth it to me to go ahead and buy those. Like Azure Standard is getting a broader amount of organic food powders in, like they have the whole milk powder, they have the A2A2 whole milk powder, they have the buttermilk powder. I seem like there's something else that they have. Um, I think they have, yeah, they have an organic cheese powder as well. But yeah, the butter powder, I actually really like that for making biscuits. And it is a great alternative if you don't have any fresh butter on hand. Just add water to any, you can even drizzle it on popcorn, add a little extra water, drizzle it on popcorn. It's decent. It's pretty good. Or even sprinkle it dry. Well, you don't want to sprinkle it dry on your popcorn. It's got to have butter to stick to. But I've actually done that too. Don't tell anybody, but I put butter on my popcorn, like real melted butter, then took the butter powder dry and sprinkled that on so it was extra buttery. It was super good. Super good. I've only done that once or twice, but it was super duper good. Now, these are ones not just the ones I've tried making before, but ones I've bought and used. So the cream cheese powder is a pretty good option to have on hand. And the heavy cream, love having that heavy cream powder on hand. The buttermilk powder, the butter powder, the milk, whole milk powder, and sour cream powder. Now, again, remember, if you're talking powder, any powdered dairy, it doesn't matter what kind it is. It doesn't even matter how high quality it is. You're still going to end up with a little bit of that powdered milk taste. It's unavoidable, but there are some out there that have a better quality. For the sour cream powder, I have tried Judy's. It's JUDEE'. And you can find them on Amazon. And Judy's has a lot of good products like that. And then the cream cheese, I know that Anthony's Goods, also found on Amazon, also has a lot of good. They're getting more and more of that kind of stuff too. They have a heavy cream powder. That's right. So I've got heavy cream powder from Hoosier Hill Farm, but now Anthony's has it and they have a better price. Okay, so then I was trying to move on to the peanut butter powder is another fun thing. I haven't bought it in years because I have a bunch stored up. And I had bought it years ago when I was buying stuff from Honeyville, and Honeyville used to have an organic peanut butter powder. They don't sell that anymore. I don't even know if Honeyville's still a thing. I stopped doing business with them, and found Mother's products and liked them better. But anyway, they did have the organic. It was sold in bags, and so then they were plastic bags too. So then I would take those and store them in quart jars and vacuum seal them. If you don't vacuum seal your peanut butter powder, it does go rancid, just like peanut butter can. So depriving anything that's got fat in it, because even peanut butter powder, even though a lot of the fat's been removed, there's still fat in there. And by vacuum sealing it, you're going to prevent it from turning rancid. So I've had some where the seal, because I was vacuum sealing a lot of it up before I realized the importance of putting some kind of barrier over the top of the powder before putting the lid on and then vacuum sealing. Because if you don't put that barrier on any of your powders that you're trying to put up for a long period of time and you're wanting to vacuum seal, then the powder, as you're vacuum sealing, will pull out from under the lid and form around the rim of the jar. And while it may seem at first that you got a good seal, it's not going to last because of that powder there. It's not a good hard seal. And so if you put it in storage and it seems sealed, it might still come unsealed. So I had that happen with a couple of jars of peanut butter powder, but thankfully it was only the powder on the very top, because I caught it in time, that ended up going rancid. So the stuff that was catching more of the oxygen when it lost its seal. So I just scooped that out and threw it away, and the rest of it was good. But, obviously scooped down a little farther than that to make sure I was getting all of it. But that worked, at least I was able to salvage it. But yeah, you'll want to vacuum seal your peanut butter powder. So the barrier is simple. All I use is, I should have brought in a sealed jar so I could show you, but I personally just use some whatever clean, obviously cotton fabric that I already have on hand, cut small enough that I can just place over the top of the powder. But if you don't have that, then you can take a chunk of paper towel, a napkin, paper napkin, a muffin. Some people like to use the paper muffin liners, the mini ones, because they'll usually fit perfectly right over the top of your powder. And then what that does is it creates a barrier so that then when you put your lid on and you go to vacuum seal, it prevents that powder from coming up and then trying to work out from under that lid, so that you can then get a good seal that way. So let's see, I think I covered everything on my powders that I was going to talk about. But again, let me say this one more time, that if you'd like to learn more about making and using different powders, I linked to the main video where I talk about a whole bunch of different powders like I did today and how I make and use them. But I also have the specific videos, some of them linked down below, but there's a lot more out there. But it's all the same. You dehydrate it, you powder it up, you use it. How you use it's going to be up to you, but I also try to give a lot of great ideas on how to use the different powders. And then for like the dairy powders, whether you buy them or make them yourself, I have a video, that's a newer one, just on how I like to use them in different ways that you can use them yourself.